everything worked, and then suddenly you find some things aren't working. I love technology. Well, let me begin again. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor and a privilege to be able to stand here and to be invited to deliver my last lecture. I was feeling a little intimidated for a number of reasons. I thought, well, what would I have to say that anyone would want to listen to? That's the first thing. And then I didn't warm up to it very quickly, but there was a very persistent professor in this room who kept after me, and I'm so pleased he did. I'm really glad to have this privilege. And that's Dr. Paul Rakes. So thank you, Paul, for your help. And before I get started today, I have a slide presentation. Several people worked on this with me, and I want to recognize them. First of all, Connie Walker, my secretary, who spent an awful lot of time getting images that I'd selected in place. And then this morning, Cody Zukoski, our helpful IT person, came in and fixed some problems that I couldn't seem to figure out how to fix. So I'm indebted to both of them. If there are any weaknesses or problems with this presentation, I assure you they are mine and not theirs. Also, I must say that when I started my career nearly, I hate to think about this, a half a century ago, I never envisioned I'd be standing in front of an audience wearing masks, as well as wearing a mask myself. And I certainly didn't envision anything such as computers back in those days. So again, this is a little bit like a fish out of water when I'm standing here and lecturing. I really enjoyed my career teaching, and I learned a long time ago that for me, effective instruction meant engaging my class. Hopefully, they're learning something in the process as I'm engaging them, trying to do things that would interest them. And so, again, the intimidation piece, I got really good, I thought, at judging facial expressions, and I could change up my presentation based on the reactions I saw in my students. So today I'm having trouble seeing whether people are grinning or are they frowning or whatever. So, well, enough of that. My presentation today is entitled Pioneer Ways and Folkways in West Virginia. This is a subject that I have always enjoyed as a professor, learning about it, talking about it, and sharing things that I've learned with my students. And I would like to point out that in the time that we have this afternoon, I hope you will excuse me, but I can't get into a lot of depth. The presentation will be basically a glimpse or a bird's eye view of what life might have been like in early West Virginia, which in many ways is applicable to the entire Appalachian region. Before I go there, I want to tell you that as a historian, I am deeply indebted to those who came before and who did a lot of work writing, finding things. And although there are many sources that could be mentioned, there are at least three that I want to single out that I think have been instrumental in my learning, in my teaching. Two are very early writers of Trans-Allegheny, West Virginia. Perhaps the most noted and one of the best sources I've ever seen as far as information on the early frontier was published in 1831 at Clarksburg, Virginia, now West Virginia, by Alexander Scott Withers, who wrote Chronicles of Border Warfare. These books are very scarce, rare, hard to find, but I wanted to bring a copy from my personal library that I possess. This is a first edition. I considered it one of my most valuable books, and I rarely take it out of this container because it's so fragile. It's bound in leather. There's also another publication that is even better than Alexander Scott Withers. It was published in 1824 at Wellsburg, Virginia, now West Virginia, by Joseph Doddridge, and it is entitled Notes on the Settlement and Indian Wars of the Western Parts of Virginia and Pennsylvania. What makes this book so valuable is that Doddridge had sources available that later writers did not have. You see, he did a lot of research before he wrote this volume. He traveled extensively across the Trans-Alleghanies before he published the book, and interviewed some of the settlers. These were the first settlers who were now advanced in age, but were still living and had vivid memories of their experiences on the frontier during the many Indian wars that swept across the area, as well as their life experiences. So he interviewed these people and then used that as one of the foundations for his publication. So we later historians are deeply indebted to Doddridge and his notes. And then finally, there's another person that has had a great deal of influence over my career as a historian, especially one in whose interests have been Appalachia. And I apologize, audience, and I'm feeling the pain of my of faculty who've been teaching these things on. It keeps sliding down, and I keep pulling it up, this mask. But that work, which I'm pleased to say I have 3 copies of it. It's this one. This work is the Allegheny frontier, West Virginia beginnings, 1730 to 1830, published by Otis K. Rice, for whom our Rice lecture series is named. This book is a classic. It's out of print. It's hard to find. Once in a while, you see it in a used bookstore. Last time I saw a copy of this, it was $150 for a copy. That's quite a number of years ago. This book is, as I said, a classic. Soon after it was published, Dr. Rice received the prestigious Award of Merit from the American Association of State and Local Teachers, or education, I should say. So anyway, it's an award-winning publication, and as far as I'm concerned, you'll have to look a long way to find a better written and more comprehensive study of Trans-Allegheny, West Virginia than this volume. So I want you to be aware of that. Any errors that are made aren't Dr. Rice's fault, but again, they're my fault if I misspeak, but I'll try not to do that. So let us begin, and let's look at Trans-Allegheny, West Virginia. You cannot understand the nature of our state, perhaps even to some degree today, without having some knowledge of its geography. This isn't the best map, but it illustrates a point. One of the dominant geographical features of the eastern United States is the Appalachian Mountains, one of the oldest landforms on Earth. The Appalachians actually stretch from, in the north, the New England states, all the way to northern Alabama, Georgia, and as you can see from this map, Mississippi. Now, the map that you're looking at actually was produced by the Appalachian Regional Commission, the ARC, which still exists. And it came out of the 1960s, the ARC, when first the Kennedy administration and later the Johnson administration declared war on poverty and identified this area in Appalachia where there seemed to be very unusual economic and in some cases social and cultural conditions. I won't go into much detail on that, but I wanted you to see what Appalachia looks like, but also to draw to your attention, only one of these 12 states lies entirely within Appalachia, and it's our great state of West Virginia. So be aware of that as I talk about the state, the Appalachians. Now, the Appalachians are known by several regional names, and a name that I will be using frequently, or a couple of names, are Blue Ridge Mountains and Alleghanies, which are our sections of the Appalachian chain. When the first settlers who came from Europe and other places arrived in America, they were confronted with some very significant geographical characteristics. Along the coast was a coastal plain that commonly called the Tidewater. Just west of that, low foothills, very easy to traverse, as was the coastal plain, the Piedmont. Then they ran headlong into a barrier. The barrier was the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it took more than a century after the first settlements were made at Jamestown and in Massachusetts at Plymouth before the colonists breached these barriers and reached across the mountains and into areas that later became a part of West Virginia. You'll notice from these four regions, there's the Valley and Ridge Province. Immediately west of the Blue Ridge Mountains is a long valley. It's known by a variety of names. Some call it the Great Valley, others the Valley of Virginia, but we West Virginians like to call it the Shenandoah Valley. This valley is very wide in the north at Pennsylvania, about 65 miles, but it narrows at the Virginia-North Carolina border to not much more than about 20 or 25 miles. Forming the western boundary of that Valley and Ridge Province is another massive front of mountains, the Allegheny Front, we know it. Very difficult to penetrate. Only a few trails and low gaps allowed people to get there, to get into the Appalachians. So, next slide. What happened when people started to move west in earnest in large numbers? West Virginia, Trans-Allegheny West Virginia, except for the Valley and Ridge Province, was largely bypassed. You can see the arrows leading down from Maryland and Pennsylvania through the Valley of Virginia, which the first settlers came about 1730. But within 20 years, that area had reached a saturation point in population, and people had to go elsewhere, further west, move on to find places. If they went on down the valley, they might get through some low gaps people like Daniel Boone and others had discovered, and get into Kentucky and Tennessee, bypassing again West Virginia. Those who did not go south might go further west, and they found that the Appalachians were not quite as challenging or as high if they moved across western Pennsylvania and then hit the Ohio Valley. In fact, the river was a great highway west for many into Ohio, parts of Kentucky, and other parts of the West. So you see this great flow of traffic. But in time, people did make their way into West Virginia, and that is the Trans-Allegheny West Virginia. The Appalachian Plateau that you saw earlier in the earlier slide encompasses approximately 5/6 of West Virginia. So most of our state is within that area. So how did they get in? Okay, next slide. What you see here are trails, mostly foot trails, and largely attributed to Indians. Forgive me for saying that. Some would say Native Americans, but I'm old school. I don't mean any disrespect, so I'm going to continue to stick with the term Indian. You can see some of the most prominent Indian trails. These aren't all of them, but they would be commonly used. In fact, later on, when the trails were improved into roads and ultimately highways, some of our modern highways follow almost exactly these old Indian trails. Once they got into West Virginia, then they found a huge collection of river systems. And, traveling along river valleys is much easier than crossing over mountaintops. So families started to follow settled in the river valleys and more remote areas. You can see that one of the greatest assets that the people of West Virginia have today is fresh water. There are many areas in the far west that they have very little. And my heart goes out to the wildfires that are going on in parts of the far west today, California and elsewhere. But thankfully, our geography is different. Next slide is a skeleton that resulted from an archaeological dig on Blennerhassett Island. For those of you who may not know where this is located in the middle of the Ohio River, an island. And I included this slide because I wanted to illustrate a point. 10,000 years before the first settlers from the old world arrived, people were living in Trans-Allegheny, West Virginia, as is evidenced here on Blennerhassett Island. In fact, over the course of time, Indian settlements were very large, and people lived for extended periods of time, hundreds of years. And some of the settlements, as I said, were very dense in population. We know this not only from that archaeological dig, but from the many artifacts that we find scattered all over our state, but especially concentrated in river valleys. I brought with me an exhibit that was found near Montgomery at a place near Adena Village, Adena, an Indian name. This is a stone tool. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I'm going to guess it's a scraper or some type of a hand tool used for cutting. If you would like to see a nice collection of these things, you don't have to go off of our campus. I may be putting somebody on the spot, but I found out about this by visiting an office of one of our IT people, namely Mike Webb. Mike is an amateur collector. He spent a lot of time near Adena Village, has collected quite a number of these things. In fact, he has a large number of them in his office. He says, these aren't so good. My good ones are at home. I was impressed with the ones that were not so good. And very kindly, he came later and brought some of his really nice exhibits to my office, and we looked at them together. I was drooling so much, he felt sorry for me, so he gave me one. So I'm indebted to Mike for this stone tool. So you can see a variety of things, arrowheads, as well as pottery. By the early woodland period in history, which would have been around 1000 BCE, Indians were making pottery. We find these things, especially again in river valleys where villages once existed. So we know there were a lot of people here. But you know, when the first pioneers, I'll call the people from the old world the pioneers, they found this state was almost empty of people. Indeed, there were a few scattered Indian settlements, villages here and there, but not many. And this led people to wonder, well, how could it be that West Virginia had almost no population when the first European settlers arrived? And so this slide helps to exhibit what we think today is the reason. This is an Iroquois warrior. By the 17th century, two powerful Indian nations or confederations had emerged in what is today the United States. In the north were the Iroquois Confederation, while in the south, primarily in North Carolina, especially western North Carolina, were and are the Cherokee. Both Iroquois and Cherokee used West Virginia as their hunting grounds. They were very rich in flora and fauna. And so we think that these two conflicting groups, both overlapping claims, may have driven out the weaker tribes. Now, it's an oversimplification to say that only the Iroquois and the Cherokee had claims. They weren't alone, but they were the most powerful. There were indeed other tribes that claimed parts of West Virginia. Notable among them were the Shawnee, the Mingo, Wyandot, and others. So there were other Indians that still were using West Virginia primarily for hunting purposes. So this is probably the most plausible explanation. There have been other explanations that have some merit. I believe this may help to explain more than anything else. Now, moving on. Next slide I wanted to show you is a system of forts. This would have been about the 1750s. As you can see, it indicates French and Indian War, and I want to point out that there were many conflicts, many wars, and I'm not going to talk about those. I just want to highlight a couple of the most prominent ones, one being the French and Indian War. This war actually started in what is now West Virginia and parts of Pennsylvania, the Ohio Valley. It began perhaps as early as 1754, and then it erupted into a huge conflict, a world war in a sense, involving two superpowers, both claiming the Ohio Valley. One was England and the other was France. And so as this war heated up, the Indians allied primarily with the French, who were not as interested in planting settlements, clearing land, pushing Indians out of their homelands. And so it became necessary to establish a series of forts. Many of these were private forts. A few were funded by the colony of Virginia and others. But you'll notice that they are primarily in the Valley and Ridge province. About 1/6 of West Virginia is in this area that I identified earlier as the Shenandoah Valley. Moving forward, by the way, one last point about the French and Indian War. We call this the French and Indian War in the United States. As an American historian, I commonly refer to it as that. But in world history, it's known as the 7 Years' War because England and France formally declared war on each other in 1756, and the conflict lasted until 1763, with the British winning and driving, for the most part, the French out of North America. So we ratchet forward. Now we're at the time of the Revolutionary War, and this is hardly more than 10 years have passed. Notice where these forts are. They're not in the Valley of Virginia anymore, or the Shenandoah Valley. They've moved west substantially. And these aren't all the forts, but they're some of the most prominent ones. Forts that were primarily funded by the state of Virginia by this point in time. The Indians are not allied with the colonists, they're allied with the British. And they're located on and in areas that are primarily along the Ohio Valley. You see Fort Pitt in the north at Pittsburgh. A little further south is Fort Henry at Wheeling, and then one of the southern forts along the Ohio is Fort Randolph at present-day Point Pleasant. So you can see how quickly things started to change. Lots of people are now beginning to move on into Trans-Allegheny, West Virginia. And so they're coming into conflict with the Indians. And so early on, because danger, Indian warfare was so commonplace, people had to figure out largely how do I protect myself? You know, there were some state-funded forts, but they were inadequate, and so it was up to many families to protect themselves. And this is a sketch of what an early private fort may have looked like, a log house, palisade around it. Probably more common is the next slide. This is a type of fortified house called a blockhouse. One of the advantages that this had, if you didn't have the resources to build that stockade and all the things that go with it, is that it made it very hard, since it's two-story, very hard to gain access to the roof, which was the most vulnerable area likely during an Indian attack. So this would not have been common in some places. And then, and families work together. I build a blockhouse. The next guy may not have it. He's my neighbor. If we have time, we're going to get together for safety in numbers. We defend ourselves in the blockhouse. So people work together. This is another fort. from the colonial, or should I say the American Revolution. This is Prickett's Fort. I wanted to show you what, in fact, this fort has been restored. It is currently an exhibit, a museum of a sort. You can go there. And then annually, there are various festivities that occur at Prickett's Fort. By the way, it's in Marion County, if I didn't mention that. So these are reenactors, and this is actually a photo, although it doesn't look like one. It's not a sketch. Here's another sketch, same place, Prickett's Fort, showing reenactors wearing the British uniform, some with the colonial garb and so forth. So I thought it was an interesting slide. So danger was very much a part of life on the frontier. This is an artist's rendition, sketch of one of the most famous Indian war chiefs, or should I say just simply an Indian chief in the Trans-Alleghanies. This is Chief Cornstalk, the leader of the Shawnee Nation. And he played a very prominent role during the French and Indian War, and then at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, he suffered a very tragic and terrible fate, which helped to spark Indian uprising in 1777, known as the Year of the Bloody Sevens by the settlers. The next slide shows you, again, a Revolutionary fort. This is an artist's conception of what Fort Henry near Wheeling. And also I wanted to include it because it's very easy to talk about men and all, those sorts of things, but we sometimes forget how crucial the role of women were on the frontier too. This slide is a representation of one of the most famous heroines of the frontier, namely Betty Zane. And I want to stop for a moment, just talk a little bit about this, and I'm going to move on quickly. But West Virginians are often proud, and writers point out, that among the last battles of the Revolutionary War occurred in West Virginia and here at Fort Henry in the autumn of 1782, September the 10th, as a matter of fact. Indians suddenly and unexpectedly set upon this fort. The colonists, or should I say now we declared our independence, the defenders of the fort were few in number because they weren't expecting the attack, for good reason. A year earlier, Lord Cornwallis, the great British general, had surrendered to George Washington and French forces at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. The significance of Yorktown certainly swept all over America, but I think the man that best summarizes how important Yorktown was the Prime Minister of England, Lord North. Lord North is said to have exclaimed when he heard about Cornwallis's defeat and surrender, he said, "Oh God, it's over." And he was right. The British had really no more will to fight. It would take nearly 2 years before a peace treaty was signed, but the word gradually went out to British forces, no more attacks. But the Indians were different. They didn't necessarily agree with the British, so the guard was let down. People were feeling like the war is over. But in September 1782, about 200 Indians, mostly Wyandotte and Mingo with some others, set upon Fort Henry and caught these people by surprise. In fact, the attack came so suddenly that just outside the fort was a private residence that had been built by Ebenezer Zane. Zane, by the way, is one of the first settlers in the area. Zanesville, Ohio is named after him. So he had a home there, and there were some people there that just couldn't make it to the safety of Fort Henry in time after the Indian attack occurred. As it turned out, Spade intervened. It's probably a good thing that they didn't, because the handful of men at Zane's house, plus the few defenders of Fort Henry, were able to create a terrible crossfire on any Indians that tried to attack certain parts of this fort. And believe you me, these people, they were wonderful marksmen. equipped with Kentucky and Pennsylvania rifles, they had tremendous marksmanship capabilities. So the Indians attacked again and again, and they suffered terrible casualties. Apparently, during the course of this attack that lasted for 3 days, a very unusual and strange circumstance occurred. A boat was traveling along the Ohio River. The men on the boat were unaware that an Indian attack was underway, and they put in at the dock at Fort Henry. Well, they were immediately set on by the Indians, who captured it, the men and the cargo. Lo and behold, when the Indians examined the cargo, they thought, the solution to their problem. For you see, this boat contained a large quantity of cannonballs, plus gunpowder. So the Indians, happy about what they had acquired, took a number of the cannonballs as well as the powder. Others went into the forest. They got a hollowed out log, tried to reinforce it a bit, stuffed it full of gunpowder and cannonballs, and they touched it off. Of course, there was a big explosion, lots of smoke. It took a little time for it to clear. But I want to quote how Otis Rice described what the scene looked like when the smoke cleared. He had such a way of stating things, and especially understatement. So again, I want to quote him if I can figure out where I put the quote. Give me a moment, please. Okay, from Otis Rice. He writes, again, the smoke is clearing, and I quote, "The charge killed several persons and wounded numerous others, all Indians," unquote. That had to be terribly discouraging, that failed attack. And then there are many stories about this battle, and there's one that's many legends. It's hard to unravel the legends from the fact, and I can't do that, but I do want to share with you what many people thought occurred here, and some writers later produced. Apparently, as the battle progressed, gunpowder began to run low in Fort Henry. And it was known that Zane had a good stock of gunpowder, and so the commander of the fort basically, according to legend, assembled the men and asked for a volunteer to go out the gate, cross that open ground under deadly fire to get the powder. One writer says that there was not a man to be spared. And I've wondered about that. Why wasn't there a man to be spared? But apparently no one stepped forward. What this artist shows you here, this lady with the rifle in one hand and the powder horn on her shoulder, Betty Zane, the sister of Ebenezer Zane, volunteered. And one of the most remarkable exploits, according to the legend, she not only crossed that compound unscathed, she reached the house, she grabbed some gunpowder and crossed it again to return to the fort with the powder that was needed to keep the fort alive. After 3 days, the Indians gave up, frustrated, and left. Now, some of them went on to attack another fort, which was equally disastrous for them, but I won't go into that, but wanted to share this thought with you. Now, I'm moving forward. After the Revolutionary War was over, and particularly after Anthony Wayne defeated the Indians in the spectacular battle in the Northwest called Fallen Timbers, 1794, Indian attacks stopped altogether in West Virginia. It was completely safe. There were no raids after that. There were sporadic attacks after the Revolutionary War, but nothing basically after that point. So now I want to get into pioneer life and focus a little more on that. And one of the things that I would be remiss if I didn't point out to you is the massive forests, one of our greatest assets, and still today, one of West Virginia's most valuable resources. Massive forests covered nearly all of West Virginia. And the thing that I think this slide brings out, and we might sometimes forget, we see forests today, and I love our forests, love to be in them, but these forests are hardly more than shadows of what once existed in the past. These are old growth trees that have been cut. They have been placed in a yard. They're waiting to be processed by a steam band mill. The interesting thing about this is that, one, I want to point out that after the Civil War, the forest came under assault like you've never seen. Railroads, steam-powered mills, improvements in river systems, and West Virginia had all this valuable lumber. So the industrialists poured in a matter of about 2 or 3 generations, nearly all of our old growth forest was gone. There was a few pockets, nevertheless, left. And this photograph actually dates to 1942. And I included it because I wanted to show you how massive these trees were, how big the logs are. And one thing I like is that person, a young man standing on top, which gives you a reference point to see how big these things are. So imagine if you're a settler, you come into West Virginia, it's forested. The work you have ahead of you to build a house and clear the land. Now, the story is incomplete. I do want to add a personal note here. There are 2 people in this room, I'm one of them, knows who this young man is. The other person who knows is my wife, who is sitting in the audience. I am blessed to have been married to her for 48 and a half years, and I hope I have that much more ahead. I came to know this young man very well in later years. That's my father-in-law, Leonard Aiken, in 1942. Where is this place located? Swandale, West Virginia, in Clay County. If you look at a map today, I doubt if you'll find Swandale on it because I think it's a ghost town. Last count I had, there was a family or 2 living there, but that was a long time ago. But it was a boom town in the early 20th century. And Leonard, my father-in-law, was about 17 or 18 years old when this photograph was snapped. So I've never shared this with anyone. I thought it would be interesting to let you see these logs and maybe a personal note. Now, I wanted to include this. It's a little bit out of order of what I intended to do, but that's my fault. But I wanted to share this with you, that when pioneers got here, they found the forests were blessed with all kinds of things, the necessities of life. They really didn't have to look for much of anything outside of the area to make a living here. And in the early days, much of the food that they consumed came from the forest in the way of animals. And I thought those of you who are cooks, I noticed our president is here. I know she loves to cook. I don't know if you've tried it, but you might want to take down this, this recipe for whole baked beaver. I'm told it's delicious. But there were all kinds of animals, even elk. Elk have been reintroduced in West Virginia and Logan County. You might know that. It's a very small herd, but they disappeared altogether until the reintroduction of them. Lots of other game animals, small game animals. One early writer said that turkey, wild turkey we're talking about, was so commonly consumed that it was served almost like bread with every meal. There's so many turkeys around, wild turkeys. So the forest provided a lot of food that they would consume. I want to talk about houses. I like this sketch. It's not the best one, but it's a sketch that shows you what a log house on the trans-Allegheny frontier might have looked like. It's an interesting photograph, and I like to talk about how these houses were built. They were usually in the form of the pen, P-E-N. And what does that mean? Well, it was a unit of about 16 by 16 feet or 18 feet by 18 feet or some combination of the two. And a person went into the forest, cut the logs that he wanted, took them to the site that they wanted to build on. Then the real work came, and that's hewing those logs so that you have flat sides and fitting them together. But you may wonder, well, why 16 feet by 16 feet or 16 by 18 or 18 by 18, what? Well, that's just about all, given the size of these logs, that a man, a mule, or a horse could haul out forest at one time. Now think about the task of lifting these things into place to form the walls. It's about all two people could handle. So when it goes up, this pen, this house, it's one room. The floors made out of similar materials called puncheons, logs that had been harvested. They were made to flat to fit together for the floors. The roofs were made out of wooden shakes, also hand split on the site from the forest materials around them. I can remember many years ago, my father, who grew up in West Virginia, working with his dad, they built some outbuildings from their house. They didn't live in a log house, but they built like a log barn and some other things. But he told me this, and I've often wondered about it. I've never been able to verify, but he said, you know, Steve, you have to put those wooden shakes on at a certain phase of the moon. If you don't, it's going to leak. So I don't know whether Dr. Ricks, who has a vast knowledge of Trans-Allegheny culture, whether he can shed any light on that or not, but I'd be interested. Yes, sure. Do I think what? Oh, I'm not sure. Now you have got me worried. Okay, all right. Can we take a hiatus? Absolutely. Absolutely. Mhm.
First of all, this was fascinating, and I can't imagine what a wonderful professor you were. Because I didn't even know what time it was, but I did have to call back there trying to keep us in track. Okay?
Mhm.
But we want to thank you for your years of service here at Tech.
Oh,
And we have some things we would like you to see. Now, I do hope that you appreciated my acting when I was so shocked to see your wife.
okay.
Oh, she was coming.
I know from past experience, she's been involved in a lot of
Well,
conspiracies.
she was involved in this one. The first thing I want to tell you is that this was planned by this wonderful group of people out here, not me. So they get the credit or the blame, one or the other. Yes. All right? Okay, so the first thing we have for you today is a certificate of your years of service. And needless to say, you can't say enough. Louder? Okay. This is for your years of service. And we can't thank you enough for all of that. But we wanted just to kind of memorialize that and make sure you had something to take home with you.
Well, thank you.
All right. And then we have a cup from one of your friends.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to let you look at it. And I believe Mr. Rutgers, who worked with you for many years at Tech.
Oh, my goodness.
And I think it has a picture.
This is marvelous.
All right, picture, I think, for you and some of that.
Uh-huh.
All right.
This is great.
He made that for you. So,
Well, this will become my preferred coffee cup. Thank you. I will make good use of it.
and then, if there's anybody in the world that deserves a plaque for his mountaineer values, it's you, Dr. Brown. For your service, your curiosity, your respect, your accountability, and your appreciation. We can't thank you enough, but we want you to know that you are one of the most valued people in this nation with universities. And we thank you so much for that. Also, we have this collective group, and a lot of other people would have been here today if it wasn't for Zoom, okay? So, when you go home in the next 2 or 3 weeks, to your house will be delivered a beautiful rocking chair with the WVU Tech emblem on it and seal. And that is a gift from all of us to you for all those years of service. So, with all of that being said, I would like to tell the audience that we will have to stop here, but we've not stopped yet. We have video for you, that we're going to show, but we can't do both.
I
So
got it. Sure.
Zach's going to put a link on the website for us so that everybody that's watching can see your last lecture again. And we're apologize that we stopped a little bit, but we have a time frame.
I understand.
And they can then see the video that all of this great group is going to get to see here in a few minutes. Okay?
Sure.
So we're going to stop there, and we thank you for this part, and then we will continue, and they can see it later.
Okay.
All right?
Sure.
Okay.
I'd just like to offer
Yes,
one.
sir. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. Thank you, Dr. Rakes. I almost forgot. You're right. Out in the conference room, Dr. Brown today did his last lecture. We have a copy of his first lecture that we are going to have framed. We have a mat around it, and we would like everyone that's on this Zoom, if you want to come in, we have white, you can come in and sign it for the next few days, and then it will be framed.
Marvelous.
Okay? All right.
I
So
just want to make one observation very quickly. I've always prided myself as a professor who's never lost for words, but today I am. I am so thrilled and surprised and pleased by this. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Okay. All right. So, Zach, you tell me when we're through, and then we will start the video for Dr. Brown. And you might want to go down here so you can see the video.
Oh, sure. Thank you.